Hello, and welcome to this lecture entitled Change and Continuity, What Historians Study. This is one of the lectures in our module about how historians think and what they think about. Because change and continuity are complex concepts that require you to spend time and gain experience to fully integrate into your own thought processes, this lecture will present little more than definitions for you to begin using as you look at both change and continuity. Let's talk about change, which is simply alterations in human affairs and arrangements over time, which reminds us that historians emphasize chronology in order to track change. What kinds of alterations do we look for? Changes in structure of human arrangements is one area. For example, how did Christianity's so-called Great Schism of 1054 create new structures in that religion? The quick answer is that it divided the church into Eastern Orthodox and Roman Catholic, but there's so much more you can know about it. A second area of change is in the nature of human affairs and arrangements. Here we can use the example of race. How have leading thinkers in the US reconceived of how they defined the idea of race and races during the 30 years from 1890 to 1920? To answer this, you could look at the way the 1893 Chicago World's Fair and the 1904 St. Louis Exposition displayed African and Asian people. Yes, gruesomely enough, there were displays of mock villages and of peoples themselves. Or you can compare the writings of Frank Boas with those of Madison Grant. A third is how humans have altered the order of their arrangements. Order means the sequential sorting of human affairs or ranking them by importance. It also means something much less concrete. How one set of arrangements evolved into another set, or how a new set replaced an older set. I'll give you an example from my own research. In the early 20th century, automobiles replaced trains as the principal mode of long-distance personal travel. I studied some small instances of how that happened, what went into US society deciding to make that particular change to reorder its transportation priorities. Change for its own sake is not really something historians study, however. Instead, to be worth the work, change should be significant. This means it should be meaningful and important, but deriving meaning and important is a matter of perspective. What changes I find meaningful might not inspire you at all, and you might wonder why I'd waste my time on the things that I study. There are some changes many people agree are important and others that appeal to only a few of us. Furthermore, whenever a group of historians decides their interests merit recognition as a subdiscipline or genre in the field, they define new areas of change as important. Just over the past 50 years, social history has emerged as a dominant subfield, all but replacing the former leading field, political history. Social history asks new questions and considers new things important. How institutions affect people, for example, where older political history thought how particular bills made it into law was important. Remember, neither human affairs nor historical subfields are linear. Sometimes older constructs reemerge in altered form. Thus, the old saw, "What is old is new again," often applies to both. What historians sometimes neglect, or at least people think historians neglect, is continuity. That is, what stays the same as the wheels of change turn. Change is almost always marginal in human affairs, so it's continuity that dominates human life. I've tried to illustrate that relationship in the background graphic on this slide using a gear ratio metaphor. Imagine the small blue gear as change and the large green one as continuity. The gear of change has 10 teeth while the continuity gear has 40. Thus, for every full revolution of the change gear, the continuity gear only moves 1/4 turn. So we as historians might see a lot of change, that is multiple revolutions in the small gear. But we should try to remember to pay attention to how little change occurs in the big continuity gear. Remember my research on how cars replaced trains for long distance travel? Though many changes occurred in the period 1900 to 1920, I have to remember that trains were still viable around the country into the 1960s, and in some areas of the country, they still provide most personal long distance travel. So when you think about change, think also about continuity. Keeping what doesn't change in mind is easier when you incorporate some of these words into how you think about your research: incrementalism, nuance, inertia, stability, tradition, and preservation. So in summary, this lecture has discussed the important concepts of change and continuity as the things historians study. Change is what we all think of first, and we can hardly take our minds off of it. And study of change over time is indeed important. Change occurs throughout human affairs and arrangements, but to be significant to you as a historian, change should be important and meaningful. There's no objective standard of importance, so we can see from every new subfield of history that seeks recognition by its exposing its own questions, interests, and methods to the scrutiny of the profession, that perspective is everything. Paying attention to continuity, the things that don't change very rapidly, provides depth to your study of history. Continuity is just as ubiquitous as change, maybe even more so. Don't become mesmerized by the fast-acting changes on the margin, by the tin-tooth blue gear of our example. What doesn't change quickly is just as important and just as interesting. This ends the lecture. As always, thank you for your attention.